Hi there, it's Chris from GC Property Group, and today I wanted to talk to you about how we assess an area before we start going and viewing properties. Because you don't want to start going and viewing properties and realise that the area won't work very well for investment purposes. So the number one thing I do whenever I start looking at an area is simply to hop online and start to have a look whether there is a good supply of properties in that particular area. And what then I'll also do is using normally the same website, so typically I use Rightmove, Zoopla, OpenRent, etc., is then have a look at that rental demand. Because if there's a very, very high rental demand but a low supply of properties, then potentially there is a lot of investment happening in the area and there's a lot of investment properties around. Whereas if there's a really high supply and low rental market, then potentially there's not a lot of investment properties in the area. So that means that potentially we've got a little gold mine to hack into there. So once we've started assessing that, what we'll have a look at doing is sort of try and work out how long some of the properties have been listed in an area. So for example, I know in Rightmove, there is a filter that you can filter down by the oldest listed. And what that will do is that will tell us whether the there's a lot of properties in the area that are potentially within negative equity. So quite oftenly, you will find that some areas have had properties on the market since sort of 2011 and 2012 because they've not been able to sell because they simply need a certain value of property, so they're not able to sell it below that. So it could be, if there's a large number of properties like that, we could do what's known as a lease option agreement, where we take control of that property on for a set number of years, and then we agree to pay a price further down the line. It's also worth researching a little bit the environmental aspects of the area. So is the area potentially looking at in a particularly high risk flood area? Or is it in an area that's low risk, but actually, do you know what? There hasn't been a major flood there for quite a while. So statistically, are they due? I'm not saying that should ever stop you from an area, but it's obviously something to be aware of and something to be aware of when it comes to the insurance perspectives, because if you're in a particularly high risk area, then obviously you're going to pay for that through insurance. Another thing I like to do is pop onto the local planning websites. So that's with the local authorities, and work out, are there any planning restrictions in place in the area? Or typically, are all the properties of a use C3, which is the normal sort of dwelling, or use case C4s, which typically flats or houses that are used for multiple numbers of people, normally about 3 to 6, that don't know each other, so your smaller HMOs. Talking about HMOs, whilst I'm there at the planning website, I'd also look to see whether Article 4 is in place. So Article 4 governs the use of HMOs and basically whether you need to get planning permission to use a property as an HMO. So there are quite a few areas across the UK where Article 4 is in place, which means that if you wanted to take a single let dwelling and convert it into an HMO, you'd specifically need planning permission to do that. However, there are some areas where Article 4 isn't in place yet, which means you can do that up to properties where you have sort of 6 bedrooms. If you have 6 or more rooms within the house, then you will always need planning permission. Now, in some areas, Article 4 is coming. However, if you purchase and convert before Article 4 comes in, you'll have what's known as grandfather rights, which means that you will not need to apply for planning permission. So those areas are a little bit hotspots at the moment, because it's believed that as soon as Article 4 comes in, the price of those properties will shoot up, therefore the value when you're looking at refinancing them. A thing I like to check for when looking at an area is, are there any big developers in doing any large scale development work? So now these big development companies, such as all your housing development companies, they do a lot of research and spend a lot of time marketing to see where the demand for houses are in a particular area. So if they're spending multi-million pounds doing a development in an area, it does mean that there probably is a demand for it. So again, it's just another thing to take into account when you're assessing whether an area is a good one for any development work or buying any investment properties. So you found your town or city and you think it works. What I would then also do is just have a look at some of the nearby towns and the nearby cities and see what they're like. Are they in a similar situation, or are they not so good? Because I think generally, if an area has surrounding towns that are also in a good situation, i.e. there's a good demand for rental properties and a nice supply, then it will help with the area that you're specifically looking for. So once I've done some of those steps, I will then pick up the phone and call the agent. Now, when I'm calling the agent, what I like to do is I like to ask them a little bit about the area, specifically the sub areas within that particular area, i.e., different parts of cities, because some parts rent well, other parts don't rent so well. They will have all this information. So typically I like to print out a map of that area and then just shade in the areas that don't work or the areas that do work. What I also like to ask them is, how quickly do things sell? Because if the properties are selling well, it means that perhaps I might not be able to negotiate so much, but if they're not selling, there's potential for a good bit of negotiation with the vendor there. And finally, I like to get an idea from the agents whether they believe the house prices are going up, to get their opinion. And also, again, they might be able to localise it a little bit more to say that that particular area goes up really, really well at the moment, or that one is pretty stagnant. So always give them a call. Agents are always a font of knowledge, and they really are one of your best bets before travelling up there specifically to view any houses. So if you are specifically looking at HMOs, I also recommend you get onto the local authority website to learn about any unique licensing aspects within that area. So typically, for HMOs or the mini-mos, the sort of ones up to 4 bedrooms, you won't need any licensing. But above 4 bedrooms, you will need licensing with the local authority. Now again, that varies from area to area, but I mean, for example, near to me, Corby, it's £1,000 for a 5-year license. So always inquire as to what that is. Alongside that, it's also worth Googling what are the specific elements required for the HMO. So there's general rules, but I know a lot of different authorities will do it slightly differently. For example, some may say that you need a designated amount of worktop space per tenant living in the property. Others might say you need a certain number of fridges or a certain amount of fridge space per tenant, whereas some others are not quite that specific. So again, really worth checking out on the local authority website. And then if you want to learn even more, just pick up the phone to a local HMO manager, because they will know what needs to be done for an HMO just like the back of their hand, and they are so useful to get in contact with. And it's always important to get in contact with several in that area. I always try to do a minimum of 3, so it gives me a very broad overview of the area. And the same again, if you are doing any single lets, always speak to a few letting managers as well, or letting agents, because they'll be so helpful in learning what rents out well and what doesn't rent out well, which area rents out well, which one doesn't. Because I know there've been times when I've viewed property, well, I've looked at an area and I've thought, that doesn't look great, but actually the houses, they just rent like hotcakes. So always worth checking out with them. I hope you found this video useful. Please subscribe to my channel, where I intend to put more and more videos up. And if you are interested in learning more about the kind of deals that I'm looking at, please subscribe to my mailing list, where I send out mails every 2 weeks, plus other exclusive content to those on my mailing list. Anyway, have a great day. Speak soon.